You can release a wheel at the top of a hill, but you have no idea how it's going to bounce or where it's going to end up. As we look around the world now, there's a crying need for humanitarian action and robust diplomacy. The United States is uniquely placed to provide both of those. The lift capacity and reach of our military is so spectacular. Instead of sending 3,000 soldiers and a hospital to Liberia, we could have sent 10 times that many in a week if our military was geared for something that was actually going to provide benefits to people and security benefits to us over the long run. Instead, we have built up a hugely oversized military that is perfectly designed to fight the threats that no longer exist. We need a military that's much smaller. I do believe that the United States has the force, the money, and the power to maintain its imperial domination well into the rest of this century. But I don't believe that we could maintain our constitutional democracy under those conditions. We are at a moment when we can start to say that we don't want to use our military action as the central part of our foreign policy. Our foreign policy has become way over-militarized. We have another chance. We have other opportunities. The United States does have the chance to work to help make this a more just and peaceful world. Now we're taking more steps in the wrong direction, and that's why it's such a thrill to see all of you here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we don't have that much time for comments and questions, but I'm sure you'll agree that hearing Phyllis and Stephen was well worth the wait. So we have microphones. If you have a comment or question, please raise your hand or just walk up to the microphone, eh?
Hi there. I want to say, in thinking about some of the intersections between foreign policy and economic policy, I believe we here in Massachusetts have a particular responsibility to get to Elizabeth Warren and help her become a leader on progressive foreign policy, which she is not at the moment, nor is her staff. They don't get it. But they do get the economic pieces. So we have to figure out what our strategy is to, in fact, take that understanding that is there in the Main Street economics, as she talks about it, and translate it into a Main Street understanding of what needs to happen in foreign policy.
That's a good.
Does she need a speechwriter?
Oh, there you go.
Hello, Sultan from Palestine. I want to ask you, you know that Yemen now under Houthi, the Houthi take over Yemen? You know that? No one knows that. You know that the Houthi group take over the capital and most of the cities, and no one, and the US and the West, take a blind eye, turn a blind eye for that, because they are Shia. And this is the problem. They support, the problem that they support the minorities, the Shia. Iran support al-Assad, Russia support al-Assad, Hezbollah fighting in Syria. No one say this is terrorist, just ISIS. ISIS is terrorist, but from the beginning, as I'm Arab, I'm from Palestine. From the beginning of Arab Spring, ISIS idea was really destroyed. And then this regime, dictatorial regime, they wanna rebuild, recreate the ISIS. And I think these are airstrike against ISIS. This is the biggest gift for them. Because, oh, we are the enemy of US, the evil, you know? So, but I think for example, no one say about anything about what Iran intervention in the Middle East, Russia, and they support the minorities. They are not, you know, we have to live together, but they support they don't see what those minorities group like in Yemen, in Syria, everywhere. They don't see them. Just they see what the Sunnis did, and this is very, very, very terrible. This is because they wanna put Sunnis only in this box. Sunnis meaning ISIS, and this is very dangerous. Thank you.
You raise a very good point. The only thing I would add is that I think that as the political culture throughout the Middle East becomes so much more sectarian than it has been, largely because of U.S. intervention and the war in Iraq in particular, that gave rise to this rising level of sectarian fighting and militarized sectarian fighting. It's created a whole set of interweaving contradictions where you have the U.S. supporting Sunni fighters in some arenas, like with the Saudis and the UAE, supporting Shia forces elsewhere, like in Iraq, and on the same side as Iran. But then you have, you know, so it's a mess. It's a sectarian mess at this point. Yeah, like that. Although the difference is, I think there's probably some MIT student who actually does know what that means. I don't have a clue, and I don't know that there's anybody right now who can figure out the sectarian divides that are crisscrossing the region.
Can I just say one thing, that that the Shia-Sunni divide and split is not a trans-historical one. It's really a product of the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq. And I want to remind people that there was actually a bit of a love fest right after the Iranian Revolution. A lot of the Islamic, Sunni-dominated Islamic movements throughout the Middle East took their inspiration from Khomeini. And there was a lot of close relationships between those Islamic movements and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Not my favorite regime, but that's just a historical fact. So this is really a creation of U.S. foreign policy, and especially the invasion and occupation of Iraq.
And I'm going to tell a story from the ground that proves this point. So in Anbar province, within a year after the American invasion, around 2004, the American commander, who was essentially the military governor there, brought the local sheiks together for a meeting. He wants to meet them all and talk about his policies. And as they were getting settled, he got up to the microphone and said, just to make everything easier for me and for everybody else, could I ask the Sunnis to sit on this side and the Shia to sit on the other side? And some of them literally looked at each other and said, are you Sunni? Are you Shia? They never really thought of it this way, but the Americans were now telling them that there's two different groups. You got to sit on two different sides. We know that because we read it in some little State Department book back in some school in America, having no idea of the history of this. So the ancient hatreds argument is always a dangerous way to explain wars, and it certainly doesn't work in this case.
Yeah.
Hi. I may be misinterpreting, but I'm disturbed by a piece of a message that I feel I'm getting here, which is that the United States is intervening where it doesn't belong. And it's my understanding that we're the instigators. Didn't Wesley Clark tell us all back in, I think it was 2003, that there was a plan? He saw the report. We were going to take out Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. It was, I think, seven countries in 5 years. So, I mean, was there a civil war before we instigated one? The same as what we did in Chile? We caused this, and that's just one other example. So I guess I would like a clarification on that. Thank you.
You know, I think that if you added up all of the plans that both non-government ideologues and inside government wishful thinkers draft and put on the shelf, they would go from way higher than this ceiling. I think there probably was a plan to take out 7 Arab countries in 5 years. I don't think that's what happened. I don't think the U.S. has that kind of capacity. It has massive capacity to disrupt existing countries. And it was, I think, as we were just talking about, the U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq in particular, particularly after 12 years of absolutely crippling sanctions that led to really genocidal impact, that's what set the stage for the regional level of the sectarian rise that we're seeing. I think we have to be very careful not to give too much credit to plans that dreamers, military dreamers and others concoct in that pestilential city that I live in, and think that they're going to be able to implement this around the world. I think one of the key things right now is this point that Stephen made earlier, that the U.S. is facing changes around the world that it cannot control. And I think some of these sectarian wars that are underway are part of that.
You know, the Americans seem to need a demon. We always need to have somebody out there that we can imagine is the force of barbarism that's about to overrun us, and we just transfer this meme or this stereotype onto a different group or a different person as circumstances change. In fact, there have been historians like Arnold Toynbee who've suggested nations really need enemies. If you don't have an enemy, you should go find one. Because without that,
Or create one.
societies become diffuse. They don't have a unified purpose. I remember reading in Shakespeare when Henry IV is dying and giving his advice to his young son. He says, busy, giddy minds with foreign wars. It's not a new idea. I read this morning, now, some of you might have read our new enemy. We've got a new enemy in that part of the world now. It's called Khorasan, the Khorasan group. So this is the evil within the evil. This is the real core that we're going after. So I read a whole story just this morning about them, how we're fighting them and how evil they are and they're coming after us. At the very last sentence it says, most leaders of the Free Syrian Army believe there is no such thing as the Khorasan group. And the United States is just using the invention of this name in order to go after militias it wants to go after. I'm glad that one didn't get cut off, and I'm glad that I learned from I.F. Stone, start reading the last sentence in the story. Forget the stuff that's on the front page.
That's great.
There was a speaker at American Friends Service in Cambridge last summer, just before ISIS was identified, and he said, yes, I really call them the enemy of the day, the enemy du jour, you know, like the flavor, like this week's flavor. But he also mentioned something that I haven't seen covered much in the press, and I wondered if the two of you might comment. He said that we had in fact supported ISIS in Syria, while on the other hand, we were attacking them in Iraq. And I haven't seen that clearly laid out in the press. However, a couple weeks, again, after he gave that same talk, there was an article in the Times saying that there was a lot of speculation over in Iraq and in Syria that in fact the US government itself, the CIA, was perhaps having a hand in the ISIS operation. You know, where was this funding coming from? How could people, you know, with the US being the opponent, how could all of these troops just be running from their posts? It almost looked like a wag the dog scene. And so I just wonder if either of you give any credence to those great speculation, interesting speculation.
I don't know if Reese Ehrlich is here in the room, but you're going to hear from him later on. And, you know, there's a lot of people bloviating about Syria. But it's amazing that we have a person that actually has been in Syria. Almost a disqualification in Washington. But if you want to hear the real story about what's going on there, come to the show that Reese is going to put on this afternoon, because you'll get that rare drop of actual knowledge to pollute all of the bloviating that comes out of that pestilential city. We started our approach to this war with that fiat, Assad must go. Okay, that begins everything. That's the beginning and the end. We decided this. And that was the reason why we started excluding other people from negotiations. And naturally, any force that opposed Assad was then our ally, the moment we said that. So ISIS would certainly fit into that category, and they were encouraged. They realized that the enemy they wanted to fight was now also the enemy of the United States. And it was the unsettled, to put it mildly, political and ideological environment in that part of the world, and the deep resentment of American occupation there that brought a lot of, I want to say, idealists to come and join this group that was finally thought to be one that was going to be pure and rebel against foreign intervention. When there's no foreign intervention, there's nothing left to rebel against.
I think the one other point, I think that's absolutely right and important. I would add one other point, which is that unlike the situation in the 1980s in Afghanistan, where the US, with Pakistan as its proxy, actually did go in and create a mujahideen organization and arm it and pay it and create it in a very conscious way through the CIA, through the Pakistani forces that became, of course, Al-Qaeda. I think that this is one of those examples where the US is helping things that existed. I get concerned when I hear questions about, didn't the US just create it all? It really strips people on the ground of agency. You know, there are plenty of people in Syria and elsewhere who want to fight against Assad, who didn't need the US to come in and tell them this is not just a US created color revolution that we should, anybody who's against Assad is an agent of imperialism or something. There is a line out there that says that, and it's really not true. And I think that the question here is, as Stephen was just saying, that this is an issue where the US is arming and paying lots of different organizations claiming they're vetted. And whether they are vetted or not, or by whom, or does the person vetting them even speak their language, know what, that's one aspect. But the other aspect is, assume that's all true. Assuming they're really vetted and they know they're only going to give their weapons to these guys that are really approved and whatever. Do they really think that if ISIS or Al-Nusra Front or any of the other stronger groups came to a camp of these vetted pro-Western moderates and said, we're taking your weapons, that these moderates would be able to do anything other than say, okay, because they don't have the military capacity to fight back. So it's not, the fact that the US didn't create the opposition doesn't mean that their actions are not strengthening them. But it does go to the question of what came first. There is an indigenous opposition that has a history. There's both secular and Islamist parts of it. There's nonviolent parts of it that have continued to resist any militarization. And a few of them are still alive. Many of them have been killed. Many have been driven into exile. Some of them are still alive. But we do have to be careful not to kind of conflate the idea that the US is helping with the notion that the US is sort of responsible for creating it all.
Let me just add this. In our military project now that we're engaging in Syria and Iraq, we have no allies on the ground. None. There is no group that wants to embrace the American agenda. It's a complete folly to believe that we're coming in there to find people that are supporting the same project that we want to support. There's no one else there who does that.
Including the Iraqi army.
Right, and I also think I found it quite absurd over the last couple of weeks to think about the Kurds who are fighting bravely to defend that town when Turkey is telling the United States, we're not sending anybody in there, we don't want to help them because they're our enemy, and it's kind of the enemy of our enemy is our friend kind of thing. But they're the ones that are valiantly fighting to stop ISIS. So you think we would be supplying them and helping them to fight ISIS along with us because they are actually doing it rather than dropping their weapons and running away? So to me, that it just goes to show how absurd this whole thing is because Turkey, our ally, doesn't want us to give any support to the Kurds, and they won't allow any Kurds in Turkey to go and help, and they won't allow any weapons to be sent over there to help this besieged town, yet they're fighting ISIS more valiantly than anybody else. And so it's just absurd. I think the other point that we need to talk about, though, today is, and probably is going to be dealt with in the workshops, is I agree that one of the major organizing forces for getting these people to go and fight with ISIS is certainly the fact that we're there. But I think we can't avoid the question of Palestine and Israel and the fact that we have supported